Hola e bienvenido para atormentaro viado. Welcome to Arry the Stag. Hey guys, welcome back to Arry the Stag. TR Tony here in a very stuffed garage. You can see we're hoping to get our new garage built very soon, so all things to play for. Lots of stag gear on the shelves here, gathering dust, but we will get there and we will prevail, as I'm sure you're following our wonderful journey. So today is a very interesting day. We've befriended a gentleman called Leonardo over in Brazil in recent weeks, who's been ardently following the Arry the Stag channel, so that's really great. And he's been really working hard on a stag project over there against all odds, and very kindly has sent me lots of pictures of his project and what he's been doing. So what I wanted to do today was to recognise what a fantastic guy he is, how hard he's working, and also to show you a little bit about the stag that he's working on and the project as it unfolds, going over the last few months and going forward into the future. Unlike many other countries, Brazil doesn't have a collectors club that is enthusiastic about the Triumph brand. In England, for example, we know that the Stag Owners Club and others bring together a large number of fans who exchange experiences and maintenance tips and all that kind of thing. They participate in events and tours and have the facility of replacing specialised parts and running workshops and that kind of thing. In addition, we know that there's loads of stores and sites specialising in rebuilding or replacement of the Triumph Stag mark, and even the marketing of brand new parts that have been re-engineered, which is really great to see. In Brazil, in a preliminary survey, it's noted that there was verified that no more than 5 or 6 Triumph Stag vehicles were ever legally imported by Brazil. Now, of these, it was only possible to identify 2 vehicles that remain preserved to this day, and still with the original matching numbers and mechanical elements of the cars themselves. Now, add to that Leonardo's car, of course, but in his case, he hasn't actually got the original running gear and mechanics, and we'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. So, Leonardo's Stag was imported on October the 29th, 1976 to Rio de Janeiro from Portugal. Apparently it was later bought by a couple in Belo Horizonte, capital of the Minas Gerais, and the vehicle eventually had problems with the engine and was sent to a local garage, where it remained for several years without being repaired, most likely, we think, because of the difficulty of accessing spare parts for it. Now, the documentation also states that the owner sadly died, and the widow only really came to question the garage after a long time had passed. She wasn't aware of where it was and hadn't had the time to follow it through. So, faced with this, the garage, because of the delay, really had to look at how to recoup their money back, and so they sold off parts of Leonardo's Stag, what was to become Leonardo's Stag, really just to cover maintenance and other kind of garage costs. When the vehicle was finally removed from the garage, it no longer had the original powertrain nor several of the mechanical components under the bonnet, and it was sold in 1982 to a collector who then kept it in a shed for approximately 16 years without even moving it. In 2018 then, this collector decided to dispose of some cars from his overall collection and announced that the vehicle was for sale in various websites throughout Brazil. Now, even being almost 800 kilometers away from Brasilia, where Leonardo actually lives, he decided one Sunday to jump in the car and drive up to Belo Horizonte to see if he could see it, and 500 miles all the way there and back is a heck of a long way. And on October the 1st, 2018, the vehicle was bought by him and then transported back to Brasilia for the beginning of its complete restoration. Now, because it's been standing for many years without any maintenance, the vehicle had to undergo some pretty major repairs to eliminate the rust. And taking advantage of the opportunity, reinforcements were also made in the airboxes and a lower subframe extensions, sleepers he calls them, but these are the outriggers, I think we would say. And it was also decided to use thicker and stiffer steel sheets, not only to prevent these sheets from deteriorating very quickly, but also to obtain greater structural rigidity for the overall Stag. Incredibly, the internal and external trim parts were absolutely original and in good shape as well. Obviously a little bit worn out by the age of the vehicle and patinated, I think we would call it, but things like the chrome and upholstery and the instrument panel and electrical parts are all being refettled back to their original condition, and in a few cases the original spares had also been imported from England, so he'd got a good supply of stock. However, the mechanical part of the car needed meticulous research work for redefinition, he calls it, in other words bodywork and restoration of the car, because under the engine bonnet itself little remained, and in addition to the engine itself, all the peripherals, the radiator, the battery box, the brake system, the power steering parts and all the other equipment had no longer remained in the car. They'd obviously been sold off. Thus, due to the extreme difficulty in obtaining these original parts in Brazil and taking into consideration that their import would be actually very unrealistic, is unfeasible. He pays 160% import tax duty on anything that comes in. Given the final cost of those parts and pieces, a decision had to be made to find a different powertrain alternative. The first option widely used in the international market, including England, was of course the well-known Rover V8, the 3.5 litre engine, or similar, since its installation would actually require little adaptation, and the required parts that go with it would and could be easily found in the English market for the Brazilian rebuild. Unfortunately, few engines were found in Brazil. There were some 3.9 and some 4.6 litre engines, but all of them were in very poor condition and without the engine ancillaries, which would require, in addition to the high cost of purchasing the engine in the first place and its total restoration, the purchase of all the ancillaries and parts abroad, which again made it pretty prohibitive. Leonardo thus sought to find viable alternatives for the adaptation of the powertrain in his Triumph Stag. Some essential criteria were taken into account, and the main one, he said, would be to look for a rear-wheel drive vehicle, as the new mechanics should really follow the original architecture of his Stag and avoid lots of transformations that might be required otherwise in the structure of the car. As for the exchange, he really didn't insist on it being either an automatic or a manual. Instead, he focused on finding a reliable powertrain with the right technical specifications that would prevent having to make lots of changes in the engine bay or adapting the bonnet or the car frame or even the rear suspension. On the other hand, he decided that whatever he did buy should be working perfectly to avoid any additional costs of possible repair that might be needed. And he also set out that the new running gear should come complete, even with the ancillaries attached. And this premise led him to focus no longer on buying at a direct replacement for the V8 Triumph Stag engine, but purchasing a donor vehicle that would be compatible at least with the Triumph's dimensions and technical specifications. And so, after lots of research and contact with all sorts of foreign collectors and car clubs, he focused basically down onto four types of vehicle. The General Motors S10 truck with the 4.3 Vortec V6 engine, the Ford Ranger truck with the V6 4-litre engine, or the BMW E36 model with the 6-cylinder inline engine, and finally he considered the General Motors GM Omega, which is the Australian Holden Commodore car, with itself has a 3.8 V6 engine in that. He ended up discarding the idea of a GM S10 and the Ford Ranger truck, given the height of those engines, which would require changes in the bonnet of the Triumph Stag itself. And for this reason, he also ended up discarding the BMW mechanics as well. Even though the engines could be used technically, they'd have to be installed on a slanted basis, which could facilitate the adaptation of the car, but really that wasn't practical. So given that he could use various mechanical components of the Omega, such as gearbox and rear wheel drive, and the identical architecture of the Triumph's rear suspension, he decided on balance to focus only on the General Motors Omega, the Holden Commodore V6 3.8. The cost of the GM Omega 3.8 engine was actually very reasonable, and there were many around in the used cars market when he had a good look around in Brazil. So he decided to pursue this as an option for replacement in his Stag, and felt that there was a really good opportunity to use this engine, given that in the US a lot of the Triumph Stags used that option for their original engine replacements when the British ones blew up way back in the day, back in the 70s. It was a very good way of fixing the cars then. In addition, Leonardo highlights that this engine is derived from the Buick 215, which was the block used originally by Rover for its engines. In fact, all the tooling for the production of these engines was sold by the Buick plant back to Rover back in the day, and the engine is slightly lighter than the original powertrain, and it does fit into the Triumph Stag's engine compartment without making any changes at all. And also they are a little more powerful than the original engine, 197 horsepower and 30 kilogram for torque versus 149 horsepower and 23 kilogram meters of the original Stag engine. So this project seeks to adapt not only this engine and its automatic transmission, but also the whole system of brakes and indeed the powertrain itself. In fact, it's worth remembering that this was one of the reasons for the choice of this model, precisely being due to the compatibility of the rear suspension donor and the receiver architectures within the Stag body shell itself. So after some intense research by well-maintained vehicles with sensible values, Leonardo finally found an Australian Omega year 2000, which he bought for the desired purpose of swapping it over, and the process of mechanicals started to take place from there on in. Meanwhile, the Stag's body repair process was quite intense and time consuming. Many parts of the body of the car had to be made manually because of the high cost of import. We've talked about that before, and almost 8 months now down the line, the car is in the final stage of painting, so he's done really well. And from here onwards, the phase of adapting and using the powertrain and the electrical parts will start. He's also going to try and use as much of the parts from the original donor vehicle as possible in this rebuild, which will reduce costs obviously and provide safety and also peace of mind and authenticity for the future use of his Stag, which when it's back on the road I'm sure will look terrific. During the rebuild process, the internal parts in the cabin, so things like the seat covers, the steering wheel and all of that have been remade, and that's really good. And after he completes the adaptation of the mechanical and the electrical parts, then he plans to take the following steps to finish the car off, and elements of that include the completion of the carpets and the seats and the final assembly of the internal and external trims and finishes. And after all of that, when he gets to it, and he's doing a great job in a fairly short space of time, I have to say, then when it's ready, he needs to take it to our equivalent of the MOT testing station and submit it to a technical committee who then have to approve its use in Brazilian traffic, given that there has been a fair bit of mechanical modification by them. And so what Leonardo has said is, in the process of searching for information for the restoration of his Triumph Stag in Brazil, he came across our YouTube channel, Arry The Stag, and has been very complimentary about following us and picking up some ideas and some tips to help him succeed in some of his restoration plans and practices. And we are now good friends on the internet, and I know he's due to come over here in 2020 on a holiday, so we will be hooking up with him at that point, and I guess filming him firsthand rather than across the world through the internet. But it's amazing what you can do. Okay, guys, so a really good update on Leonardo's progress. What a great guy down in Brazil with very little support around him. I think he is a credit to the Triumph Stag renovation movement, and to all of us, including me. You know, he's making some really good progress in what is a difficult area with little support around him. So if there's anything, I would encourage you guys to send him a message, and I know he'll be very keen to receive any top tips or anything else that you guys have covered that he would benefit from. As I've mentioned, he's back here in 2020, so we'll be able to catch up with him then and see how he's progressed with his stag by then. But in the meantime, I think from all of us to all of you guys on Arry the Stag and on the channel, to Leonardo, very well done. Thank you very much. You will be getting a bobble hat, Arry the Stag bobble hat in the post, so we'll send that over to you. Meanwhile, I've got my hat here, well, kind of, to say ciao for now, and we'll see you guys online on Arry the Stag very soon. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share. It's all good fun. Olé!